It's a hearty welcome to Media One Center Studio. We are broadcasting from number 3 Mama Street in Freetown. And today we are privileged to welcome Professor Dr. Peter Baofu. Dr. Peter Baofu is an American visionary and author of 180 scholarly books and of all kinds. And we are privileged today to have you in our studio. Thank you and welcome to Star Radio and Star TV.
Okay, thank you for having me too. And it's nice to see you.
Well, this is the very first time being in Sierra Leone, but let's take a generic question. How do you see Sierra Leone?
Well, that's a long topic. There are so many different issues that we can talk about Sierra Leone and Africa. So I'm not sure which one you have in mind. There are so many different issues about poverty, about unemployment, about efficiency, about corruption, I'm not sure which one they have in mind.
Just a general view. You've been here for some time now, a few days. I'm sure you've gone around some areas and you've seen them. What's your impression?
I think that Sierra Leone is very comparable to your neighboring countries. There are some good things, there are some bad things. I think that's true about every single country. If I talk about the good things first, that's the thing that people like to hear the most. I think that people here, just like quite a number of countries in Western Africa in this case, they are much more friendly, for example. And the natural scene, by the way, is quite beautiful. I think it's quite normal in Africa. The beaches, by the way, is very beautiful. Yeah, there are a lot of some other things. The bad things, on the other hand, is that you probably know by now, electricity is a major problem here.
Definitely.
And this is the thing that I see as soon as I arrive at the airport. I can see that electricity is a major problem. It is even at different places, on and off, on and off. In some poor neighborhoods, it's off most of the time. So this is going to be a serious problem for economic development, because every time when you stop each day like this, you lose a lot of labor time, and productivity is very low because of that. So I think that is one of the most important, most urgent problems facing Sierra Leone in terms of development. I think that you need to provide sufficient electricity, because it's the same problem in your neighbor Gambia. I was there a few years ago. Now I just returned and had a visit. You know what? Things are much better now there. They are asking the Chinese to come in and help them to develop electricity. So I think that is probably one of the most urgent problems facing the economy here. You must fix that problem, because electricity now it is the foundation of almost everything you do. And when you have your work cut off like this so many times each day, and sometimes people cannot even do anything, most of the time they are idle. I mean, that is a major handicap.
So, Professor, let's now look at what you have for. I see a whole lot about you talking about the future of humanity. But let's talk about your life journey. How has your life been like?
Well, my life is very unusual, because I have been in more than one country, about 160 different countries by now, 160, and there are only about 193 countries on Earth by now, so I only have 33 more to go before I have been in every single country with no exception on Earth. So my life like this is very unusual, because 99.9% of the human population do not live like that, and I do. And why do I do that? That's because I have the passion, I have the devotion that I would like to understand humanity, not just one culture, one ethnic group, or one race, or one society, me versus you. No, I just want to understand the totality. It doesn't matter which country, which gender, which ethnicity, which race. Because I am a visionary, I look into the future, I understand, I want to know the future of humanity in all aspects of life, and I want to go into each of them so I can see things for myself. Because many of the previous intellectuals in human history, they don't go out too much. They stay in their own country, they read some books, they do the research, and they talk about whatever their country. I have learned this from my professors and also other people in the US, and I learned that that is very self-defeating in the long term, because a lot of people in the US do not quite understand foreign countries and foreign cultures, because the culture is very American-centric and Western-centric, and this is one of the reasons that I do that. And the other one is my passion in life that I have. I devoted my life so far on ideas, and that's why I have written 180 books so far and provided more than 150 different visions, and that is linked to my travel around the world with no exception. That's why I'm in Sierra Leone, because I cannot understand the world without you also.
So I know after this, after your visit to Sierra Leone, I know a book will come out of here. I know that a book will come out of here. But let's talk about the books that you've written. You've written about 150 books. A whole lot.
180.
180 books.
And 150 theories and visions of the human future.
Written about 180 books. And I know from Sierra Leone, another book will come out of here from your visit, what you've seen in Sierra Leone. So tell us about the books that you've written.
I have written about 180 books so far in all fields of knowledge, with no exception, in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. That means a comprehensive analysis of the whole humanity in all aspects. I can classify my 180 books into 2 major categories in relation to theory and meta-theory. And under theory, I subclassify them into 4 major subcategories in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. And then if I subdivide them further under each category, for example, under society, I subdivide them in relation to the political, in relation to, let's say, social organization, social institutions, social strains, social structure. And under each of them, I further subclassify them as a social institution in terms of economy, in terms of politics, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, I mean, on and on. So under subcategories, I classify them. Now, under each of them, I provide a solution for each of them. So it adds up to more than 150 theories.
Okay, so let's talk about one of the topics. Talk about culture. Talk about the environment. What do you say?
Okay, let's talk about culture first. That's fine. Since you mentioned that, under culture, I also subclassify them into many different topics about ideology, about language, about music, about dancing, about sports, about ideology, about philosophy, about so many other things. So I don't know which one. And normally, when people talk about culture, they talk about values and beliefs in the civilization, for example. So I don't know which one that you have in mind, which is interesting to you.
Basically, in your books, I know you talk about music, also you talk about the culture of the people wherever you go. So, what will you say about culture of people wherever you go?
Okay, that's it. Then let's say we can talk into the different cultural values and beliefs in relation to a specific culture. For example, in over here, in relation to Western Africa, which is very different from, let's say, Northern Africa, you can talk about, for example, the language that we are speaking over here. Let's say we are speaking English right now.
Definitely.
Why not some of the languages? Well, this has something to do with the European colonization. So that is an important aspect of that, because once your culture is understood from the perspective of one language like this as the official language, it does affect the way that you think about the world. Okay? So if you think in terms of English, for example, your thinking is going to be influenced by the European, in this case the British, way of looking at the world. If you speak another language, for example, I myself, I understand more or less 10 different languages. So I can see that when you look at reality from one language, you often look at reality from the standpoint in this language, which is affected by the culture in which this language is developed over time. So your mindset in many ways become more and more European or British the more you understand and speak in that language. Unless you have the opportunity to go to many other languages, then you have the opportunity and the privilege to understand reality from multiple perspectives. Then you don't have this kind of narrow viewpoint anymore.
So now let's come back to the aspect of humanity.
Yes.
When we talk about humanity, what are we talking about?
Normally, when I talk about humanity, I talk about everything. That's why I have 180 books, for example, in relation to theory and meta-theory. And the theory, I classify in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. So when you talk about humanity, you can talk about humanity from the standpoint of the human mind, or from the standpoint of nature, or from the standpoint of society, or from the standpoint of culture. Or if you talk about meta-theory, then we can talk about humanity from the standpoint of, let's say, ontology, from the standpoint of, for example, methodology. I mean, so that means that I know that's very complicated, that's very amazing, overwhelming every time I talk like this because I'm not an ordinary person. I look at reality again from the total perspective with no exception. People don't think like that, but I do, because I'm a founding father of many of the visions of the human future.
So if we talk about humanity on nature, on the aspect of nature, what would you say?
Okay, for example, if you look into humanity from nature, that's also a very interesting topic. We can talk about, let's say, about physics, about chemistry, for example. Let's say about climate change, for example. That is a good example. About ecology, about the evolution of the earth, about the future of human civilization when they expand into outer space. We have to go into outer space in different planets, different galaxies in the distant future. Then we have to look at the distant environment. Or we see that there are a lot of different things that we can talk about. We can talk about, for example, whether the earth is sustainable. You think that we can continue to live like this on this planet Earth? And some of my vision is to talk about the future of the Earth. And I argue, for example, that the Earth, as we understand that, is not sustainable. We have to get out of it. We have to move into outer space in the longer term for humanity.
So now, the aspect of artificial intelligence,
yes.
How does it come into
artificial intelligence in this case is to understand humanity from the standpoint of the mind. So before you ask the question, it's from nature. Under the mind, you can talk about many other things. We can talk about cognition, perception, reasoning, memory, problem solving. AI is a good example. AI stands for artificial intelligence instead of talking about human intelligence. Now that is important to understand humanity because one of the major visions that I have is the emergence of post-humanity in the human future, in which I argue that a human race like you and me will not survive anymore. That will be in the future that human beings will emerge to replace humans. And artificial intelligence is only one indicator of the emerging future that I've been talking about in my publications. That's a good answer to your question. What can we understand humanity from the standpoint of AI, in this case, in relation to the mind?
So let me bring you again to your visions.
Okay.
You have over 150 visions.
Yes.
So just give us a few examples about the vision. What sort of visions are we talking about, or you propose?
Okay. I can talk about many things. Let me give you some example about society, because this is one aspect that we have not yet spoken much. Under society, to understand humanity, you can talk about economics, you can talk about political science. For example, one of the major theories that I have proposed is to understand that capitalism, as we understand that, will not survive. It will be replaced by a new economic system. I call that post-capitalism. And democracy, as we understand that, will not survive. It will be replaced by a new political system. I call that post-democracy. Now you may ask the question, why do I care to talk about this? That is because at the end of the Cold War, in the US especially, let's say in the 1990s, I'm not sure if you remember, but since I was in the US at that time, I grew up there, so at that time, a lot of people in the West, not just in the US, you go to Europe, Western Europe, you can go to North America, Australia, New Zealand, the Western world, they really believe that we, at that time, they think, oh, we are now in the end of history mode, in the sense that a Western version of liberal democracy and market capitalism, they stand for the peak of human civilization. That's when the US won the Cold War. Okay, so history is going to, because it stands for the weak, there will be the end of ideas. There will be no more new ideas coming up, which can be better than liberal democracy and market capitalism as the highest achievement of human history. I argued at that time that that is nonsensical. That is just a hubris of the post-Cold War mentality. I argued at that time that not only that is not the end of history, that's the beginning of new history coming up. Both liberal democracy and market capitalism will not survive because of fundamental problems in them two systems. One is in economics, the other one is in politics, and I propose that one of them will be replaced by post-capitalism, the other one will be replaced by post-democracy. At that time, for example, when I did the presentation, as you can imagine, many people could not believe what I said. Well, I get used to this because as a visionary, I always encounter people who dismiss what I said because I'm ahead of history in that sense. Because I see many things that they do not see. That's why they have to dismiss you, because they don't see what you see.
And we've been talking to Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, and he has been talking about future of humanity. This professor has written a whole lot of books, around 180 books, and with a vision of 150 visions. So, Professor, let me come back to you. How will this vision future into the aspect of African society? How do you vision this into the African society?
Okay, in another book, in fact, I have written quite different books. They are also in relation to Africa, in relation to mind, in relation to society, in relation to culture, in relation to nature. Let me give you some example. I have written a book in more about 20 years ago, in which I made a prediction that China could emerge as the dominant superpower, okay, together with India. And the US will no longer be dominant, the EU will no longer be dominant, Russia, Japan, they will be no longer dominant, okay? It was many years ago. At that time, no one believed that it was like many years ago. And I also make another prediction that there will be a second Cold War between the US and China. Okay, that I made a prediction some years ago in the the early days of the Trump administration, but not this one, the first one. Now that is important to understand Africa. You might say, why is that related? The reason is because I also make a prediction I spoke about also too, is that for several hundred years, especially since the age of European colonization, Africa has been ignored. Africa has been colonized. Africa has been subdued. Africa has not experienced much of any development as the rest of the world. And the European, as you know, they carved out Africa into different regions, by different power. The British, the French, for example, but you also have some other minor ones like the Portuguese, for example, the German, for example, the Dutch. They also occupy quite a number of them. But the major point over here is that the French, let's say, in Western Africa and Central Africa, and then you have the British in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa and all that. Now that is important because things have been changing in the last 10 or 20 years because of China. Okay, because of the investment in infrastructure, China has done more for Africa in terms of economic development in the last 20 years, more than what the Western colonial powers have ever done for you in the last few hundred years. If you look into the infrastructure, and that's so important for development to take off. You understand economics, for the economy to take off, you must do something for them to take off. And one of the most important indicators is that you must have good infrastructure. Without good infrastructure, that's why I spoke about electricity a while ago. You like it. If you do not fix that one, you cannot go very far because all your work will stop. That is important. That's infrastructure over here. You have many different forms of infrastructure. You can talk about roads, bridges, ports, schools, clinics, electricity. There are so many things. You need to provide them. And China has been helping Africa. China has invested so many, we want to talk about $1 or $2 trillion, maybe more, in the last 20 years alone. And for that, now you may say, if Africa is so poor, where do you get the money to invest all of this? And China has helped you. Now, you borrow money from them. In many cases, you do not pay back. In fact, one of the major habits that African countries have been doing to Chinese, each time they borrow money, yes, we will pay you back in 2 years, 3 years, whatever. Each time when time comes, they will say, oh, we have no money to pay back, can you restructure, can you cancel? Yes. And another one is also foreign aid, also another part too.
So in all of this, I mean, it's all of the natural resources that we found in Africa. I mean, if you look at Sierra Leone for us here, there's diamond, there's iron ore, there's cassava, there's bauxite. Yes. It's all of these natural resources. Why do you think Africa is still poor?
Yes, I have been asked this question many times. That's a good one. Let me give you some examples. This time, you just mentioned yourself diamond, right? Look, Sierra Leone it is rich in diamond, but how come Sierra Leone is poor? You cannot even provide basic electricity for your own people. At the same time, you are so rich in diamonds. I mean, diamonds are very costly, they are very expensive. You can sell them well, you can earn a lot of money. So Sierra Leone, by that definition, by the indicator, you should be thinking Sierra Leone is very rich. But in reality, the majority of the population are poor, but we have a small percentage of the population in Sierra Leone, they are very rich. If you step out your neighbor not far from here, Nigeria. Nigeria is a major oil producer. Nigeria is part of OPEC, just in case you do not know, one of the major oil producers in the world. Okay, yet Nigeria is so poor in terms of income per capita. Why? Sorry to tell you, corruption. In income inequality, not just formally but also informally, we have to think about this more carefully. Let me repeat one more time just in case the audience did not hear me correctly. When you talk about income inequalities, that is even more important to talk about income inequality in the informal sector, not just in the formal sector. In many cases, the official data are propaganda. And even though some of the official data is provided even by the United Nations, but the formal sector gives you a very misleading picture. In many cases, if you look at the formal sector, for example, the country is not that unequal. But look at the informal sector when a lot of economic activities have been happening, people do a lot of business, but they never show up in the official economic data. And there you have a larger inequality because so much corruption in everyday life. Police, immigration people and all that, everywhere you go they ask money. They ask me for money all the time on the street. Now this is informal, so it does not show up in the formal. If I give them money or do not give, it doesn't show up at all in the formal data. Okay, official, that's what they earn, so and so and so. That's what you indicate. So you look at official data, income inequality, yes, but there's not much. But it's extremely misleading because you do not look into the informal sector. They are not reported. And that's where all the money come out. And all in Nigeria, you have all this kind of oil. They go into the informal sector. Over here, I don't need to go into that. There's also a lot of informal sector too. You say, to answer your question, you are so rich in resources and yet you end up being so poor. So another urgent thing is that you need to tackle this kind of corruption, not just in the formal sector. More importantly, in the informal sector.
Professor, I would have loved for us to continue this discussion, but time is no longer on our side, and we have to go. But we've been talking to Professor Dr. Peter Baofu. He's from the United States. He has lived in the United States for quite a while, and he has written about 180 books and with a vision of 150. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us on Star TV and Radio for this discussion, and we're privileged to have you. Maybe in some other occasion we'll have you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for having me.